I've always loved the underdog object, the object that doesn't in itself look like it's important, but actually carries a great story around it. Don't know where it's come from, don't know what it was doing, don't know if it'll ever sell, has no real story to tell, until you get to here, where it suddenly says, Neil's take on things. I've never had so little and been so happy. Which immediately gives you a kind of story about this, which I love. My job title is Head of Creative Direction at the Science Museum. That is a little like being an orchestrator of all the different creative inputs that arrive in the museum. I'm responsible for overseeing all of the exhibitions and understanding how to talk very specifically about the world of science and technology to our audiences. There is a direct relationship between objects in museums, which in themselves might look ubiquitous, grubby, but actually have a story bound into them. I might think, would it ever be possible to actually replicate this sort of informality within a label to an object? Of course, it wouldn't be, because the moment I say this is an object, it immediately gets an acquisition number, and the museum's job is to protect it for the future. Every object has a story. The difficulty is dragging the story out of that object, and here you've got a perfect example of how that can happen. I love the museum when everybody's gone home. It's a very special place. Even after 20 years of being here, I feel incredibly privileged to be able to walk through this space, which is a sort of time capsule, a frozen moment in our civilization. We have some objects which are truly heroic and have a voice, have a real kind of eloquence, and demand that you look at them. Other objects, you might completely ignore them if you just found them on a table somewhere. You've got a real mix in this market between people who are selling quasi-antiques and people who are selling second-hand screws and nails and tools. There's a stall further up which just has the detritus of people's lives, and I love sifting through that. But I do enjoy trying to make up stories about people's lives from what you see in the stalls. Objects are nothing other than containers and illustrators of stories. I find these really interesting because in the Science Museum we've got lots and lots of this stuff. There's something funny that happens in a museum. There's a tendency for the life to be taken out of things. They're kind of sterilized, and the act of putting them into cases further sterilizes them, and giving them a label which is very formal sterilizes them. Here, within this box, this box contains some person's illnesses, their anxieties, and you can build a picture up about people. There are boxes over there with photographs of people, through their lives, and this is a museum of the unknown life. The notion of having a collection that reflects everyday life is terribly important. Collections like this do refer to the way science and technological developments have affected the way we live. But the difficulty that we have in the Science Museum is how to bring life back to those objects which have lost their ability to speak. I have found objects in Brick Lane which I've often thought deserve to be in the museum. I often come in here and buy clothes hangers because he has a great collection of them. It's a sort of Aladdin's cave, but I also always feel it's intensely personal. My view of quite a lot of the objects here is they're more valuable than quite a lot of the things in the Science Museum, because each object has a story, but actually the collection of the objects is also a story in its own right. This is like just a crazy piece of theatre. Every Sunday morning I go to Brick Lane, and every Sunday morning I'm exposed to something extraordinary. Reading of the history of a city through the things that you see in front of you. Buildings, people, graffiti. I've always loved cities, and I think London is unique in its ability to tell stories over time. London, in a way, is the dream museum because it's full of life. It's also full of all the scars that are a consequence of the technologies that the city has given birth to, consumed, and spat out again. For me, once the public have gone, there is a kind of different world that's created here. The pressure for these objects to tell their story is relieved. But curiously, when that pressure is taken off them, they kind of magically come to life themselves. I would do this job for free to be able to have moments like this, where the museum is a truly, truly magical space.